In this video, I want to identify some integrative negotiation tactics. Well, to start with, if you're not familiar with an integrative negotiation, please go back and watch our video on that to describe what it is. But in summary, it's a scenario where you try to expand the total value of interest at stake by trading off what one party values more about the interest and what the other party values more about the interest. So collectively, all parties do better than they could have if they simply fought issue by issue, and ultimately value would be destroyed for one party and less value would be obtained by the other party. So in that way, you have the opportunity in an integrative negotiation to, as they say, expand the pie, right? To create more value than previously existed in the negotiation. Okay, so how do you do that, right? Now, we broke down strategy into orientation, objectives, and tactics, right? Making the negotiation integrative in nature is an objective. So these are tactics, once again, that can be used for that purpose. So to start with, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to expand or modify the resource pie in a way that creates additional value, right? So let's start with the second bullet here in terms of how you can do that, right? One way is to use non-specific compensation, meaning you go outside of the interest at stake in the negotiation and try to add a completely separate benefit to the other side, right? Something like paying someone off, for example, to go with your position, right? I'm not equating that with a bribe, but basically coming outside and offering additional value outside. So non-specific compensation being adding value to them that is outside or secondary to what is at stake in the negotiation, right? Okay. Cutting cost of compliance, right? In this scenario, you're basically saying, look, this is, the value you're looking for, this is the value I'm looking for, but I also have the ability under this scenario to reduce external costs for you, meaning this will make your life easier, it will make things cheaper for you and how you operate, that type of thing. Say, for example, we're negotiating over supplies, right? And you were to offer a scenario where you can reduce the cost of whatever it costs them to use the assets or resources that you're negotiating over, right? This would be something outside the primary benefits, the primary interest being negotiated, and you're reducing some secondary cost to them to make their life easier, and I guess in a way they pay less for that, right? So cutting cost of compliance, what they normally undertake or do as part of the transaction, right? Finding a bridge solution, that is when parties are separated in their positions, right? And you provide an alternative that allows you to bridge the separation between the two. Oftentimes it's temporary in nature. It can be contingency based, but it's basically just to get you over that hump that is separating you. Oftentimes it happens with a single interest, and you use a separate interest or something there to somehow bridge the divide between those two interests to make up the value between the two, right? That's very integrative in nature. It helps you look at it holistically. You're integrating other value in here to get you from point A to point B, where otherwise perhaps there's no zone of potential agreement for this interest, right? A contingency contract there that we'll talk about in the end is a very effective way of doing that. Okay, superordination, that means arranging or prioritizing one interest highly above another, right? That type of thing. If you can order or stack or arrange the interest how you desire, and then you put whatever the most desired interests are up front, that the other party can gain that value, then perhaps on the other values, again, you can trade off in that way. So, superordination of the value, okay? Simply being compromising, willing to compromise your position for the benefit of the other party, and showing that, making that known is a integrative tactic to employ, okay? attempting to brainstorm or come up with new ideas for how you can expand the pie, how you can add value for all parties to the negotiation. That could include adding additional interest. It could be dividing the interest at stake in different ways, but simply coming up with ideas as to how you can do that. Entering into a brainstorming session with the other party allows both parties to communicate better and put their ideas out on the table. Okay? Take surveys. That means asking other third parties for ideas, right? Getting information from outside sources. One, it can have some level of influence towards persuasion of the other party, right? Because you're using third parties as a reference point. That is a source of power in terms of persuasion in a negotiation, right? So taking surveys from others, right? Perspective taking, that's simply asking the other side what they want or their position or their for an explanation from them, right? Taking their perspective, asking questions from them and listening to them. It's a communication technique that, once again, all parties feel heard. It brings out new ideas, that type of thing, all right? Unbundling and bundling, right? That means combining interests together, putting options together instead of just dealing with issues, or interest in the negotiation issue by issue or interest by interest. You combine 2, 3, 4 or more interests together, and then if a party comes back in some way, you shake up the whole bundle, right? By saying, okay, you can't do as much on this one. If you go down on this one, let's do more on this one and more on this one and more on this one, that type of thing. Well, no, I can't do that. Well, let's leave this interest out of it at first. Let's go down on this one, up on this one, and this one. One, you can start to find out what the other party cares about, right? You'll start to be able to identify their order and priority of interest and the extent to which they value each interest, right? That is extremely valuable information for you. But two, it takes the pressure off, especially when you don't have a zone of potential agreement between two interests or an interest there is distributive in nature. It allows you to identify that so you can perhaps just split the difference or trade off, split the difference between those so you can trade off value with others. Or if that party values that interest far more than you, you can trade off completely. Let them have more of that interest and you raise up or acquire more of an interest that they do not as value as much. Okay? So that's how bundling and unbundling interest works. Log rolling, that's something that we just talked about as part of bundling and unbundling. It's where you go up on one and go down on another, right? Anytime one side goes up, the other side goes down when you're rolling a log, right? So that being said, with that tactic, anytime that one party wants more of something, you have them reduce what they're requiring in another. That is the best way to identify interests that parties value differently. Like if one party values one interest more than the other, right? That is the best tactic I can think of to identify that, other than simply asking them if they're willing to tell you. That is perspective taking, right? Multiple simultaneous offers, that can be very useful, particularly in highly complex scenarios. You can throw out this bundle of interest, this bundle of interest, this bundle of interest, all at the same time. And, which one do you prefer? Type scenario. It has the exact same effect of identifying or providing information about how much one party values one interest or another. But again, it's a very effective tactic. And then lastly, contingency contracts. That's where parties can't come to terms or accept the other party's position in a given way. So you add a contingency in there that says, okay, if this happens, I'll do this. But if it does not happen, then you have to do this, right? I will pay this much in taxes, okay, up until this amount, right? But if the total revenue becomes more than this, you pay this amount back to me, right? So we put a contingency there. It's a way of hedging a gambling scenario, right? Instead of putting all of the risk of the situation going badly, like the company not performing well. You're selling the company and you say, all right, I'm going to put a contingency upon it, right? You pay this much for the company if revenue production continues at this rate for this amount of time. If it does not, then I will pay more, right? Or I will pay less, whatever side you're on. Type scenario of the contingency. So it adjusts things pending what happens in the future. So it allows the sharing of risk or the allocation of risk between the parties in that way. So taken together, these are all integrative negotiation tactics that that you will see in a negotiation. In a separate video, we'll talk to you about sometimes when there are errors that you'll find in pursuing integrative tactics, things that you can do that make integrative tactics less effective, even though generally they are the most desired tactic to use in a negotiation.